Welcome to this explainer. So, today we're going to take a journey back through early 20th century history. I want you to picture it almost like a classic black and white documentary. We're going to uncover exactly how a vulnerable, scattered community managed to build a highly structured national defense force completely from the ground up. If you're visiting historical sites around here and you've ever wondered how a modern military actually comes into existence before a country is even born, well, you are definitely in the right place. Let's dive in. Imagine walking down these dusty roads connecting tiny, isolated agricultural settlements. We're talking about the early 1900s, living under the shifting powers of the Ottoman and later the British empires. Now think about this. There was no official government for the Jewish community living there, no official army. Honestly, no real security. The community pretty quickly realized a hard truth. If they actually wanted to build a home, cultivate the land, and create a future, they had to take absolute responsibility for their own defense. But that begs a massive question, right? Who protects a nation before it even has a state? Well, this journey really begins with Theodore Herzl's famous vision, "If you will it, it is no dream." This one powerful idea really fueled those early pioneers who were setting up small farming colonies. But, a dream is one thing, reality is another. And this dream collided with some very complex realities on the ground. As the Jewish community grew and purchased more land, they found themselves in a landscape where both Jewish and Arab national movements were laying claim to the exact same territory. Tensions rose, and frankly, the need for security just became impossible to ignore. So we're tracking a pretty fascinating evolution today. It started incredibly small, with localized, highly secretive guard units. You had Bar Giora in 1907 and Hashomer in 1909. Really, these were essentially just watchmen on horseback. But as the security challenges grew, they forced a massive evolution. We go from these scattered local guards to the Haganah, then to the elite Palmach strike force, and finally, all the way to the modern Israel Defense Forces, the IDF. But every story has an inciting incident, right? That turning point where everything changes. For this story, it happened at a tiny, isolated northern outpost called Telhai back in 1920. Following the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, the borders were just entirely chaotic. A fierce battle erupted between local Arab forces and the Jewish defenders of Telhai. The confrontation was deadly, resulting in the loss of 8 defenders. It was a total tragedy that sent shockwaves through the community. It completely shattered the illusion that just having a few local guards was going to be enough to protect these growing settlements. The legacy of that specific battle is actually something you can still see today. The commander at Tel Hai was Yosef Trumpeldor. He was this decorated, one-armed veteran of the Russian army. As he lay mortally wounded, he is attributed with saying, "It is good to die for our country." If you're touring the area, you might actually visit the famous Roaring Lion monument that marks the site today. But here's the thing. His final words weren't meant to glorify death. Instead, they sparked this profound shift in mindset. It became this ultimate symbol of national responsibility, basically proving that the community had to be willing to pay a heavy price if they wanted to defend their future. And they learned the lessons of Tel Hai fast. Just a few months later, on June 15th, 1920, at the Kinneret Conference, the Haganah was born. Haganah literally just translates to the defense. They operated completely in secret as an underground militia. They would actually hide weapons in these secret underground caches known as slicks. But here is the absolutely crucial detail to remember. The Haganah was never a rogue militia. From day one, it was subordinated to the elected national institutions of the Jewish community. It answered to civilian leadership, not to some single warlord. So, as the 1920s progressed, the violence really escalated, eventually culminating in the devastating riots of 1929, which tragically included the destruction of the ancient Jewish community of Hebron. In response to this, the Haganah adopted a policy that was pretty controversial at the time. It was called havlaga, which means restraint. Essentially, this meant prioritizing moral restraint and what they called purity of arms. They focused strictly on self-defense and vehemently avoided uncontrolled vengeance or indiscriminate retaliation against Arab civilians. It was, at its core, a strategy of demonstrating real power through intense discipline. Fast forward to the Arab revolts of 1936. The British Mandate authorities started heavily restricting the establishment of new Jewish communities. So what does the Haganah do? They shift from passive defense to rapid initiative. They came up with the ingenious tower and stockade method. Using prefabricated wooden walls and a watchtower, they would construct an entire fully fortified settlement in a single dark night. Why? Because by British law, once a structure with a roof was up, it couldn't just be torn down. It was basically a masterclass in utilizing legal loopholes for defensive settlement. But sitting behind wooden fences wasn't going to be enough forever. With the help of a very unconventional British officer named Ord Wingate, the Haganah learned how to step outside their stockades. Wingate established the special night squads. He taught the defenders how to literally fight in the dark, mastering night patrols, rapid movement, and the vital element of surprise. This absolutely revolutionized their tactics. It planted the seeds for a highly mobile, offensive-capable military force. Then came 1939, and the whole world changed. World War II broke out. But at the exact same time, the British issued a white paper that severely restricted Jewish immigration to Palestine, right as the Nazi threat exploded across Europe. Talk about a profound strategic dilemma, right? Leader David Ben-Gurion really captured this impossible tightrope perfectly. He stated, "We will fight the war as if there is no white paper, and we will fight the white paper as if there is no war." So while thousands of Jewish volunteers joined the British Army to go fight the Nazis, the Haganah was fiercely fighting the British immigration blockades at home. They organized Ha'apala, which was this massive, incredibly dangerous clandestine immigration operation. Using old rusty ships, the most famous one being the Exodus, the Haganah actually managed to smuggle over 100,000 desperate Holocaust survivors all the way across the Mediterranean, sneaking them right past the British naval blockades to safety. As you can probably imagine, all of this intense pressure caused some serious fractures. As tensions with the British boiled over, 3 distinct underground factions emerged. Now, they were all united in their desire for a Jewish state, sure, but they were deeply divided on strategy. First, you had the Haganah, the mainstream approach, focused on defense and answering to national leadership. Then you had the Etzel, an aggressive faction that believed in retaliation and totally rejected the policy of restraint. And finally, there was the Lehi, a radical splinter group that viewed the British as the absolute primary enemy, even in the middle of World War II. Following World War II, when the British still refused to open the gates to Holocaust survivors, these rival factions basically realized, okay, we have to work together. In 1945, they briefly united under mainstream command to form the United Resistance Movement. Together, they pulled off these massive, synchronized operations to pressure the British. This included the Night of the Bridges, where they simultaneously destroyed key bridges linking the region, and an incredibly daring, bloodless breakout at the Atlet detainee camp to free imprisoned immigrants. But that fragile unity, it didn't last long. The breaking point happened in July 1946. The aggressive faction planted explosives in the basement of the King David Hotel in Jerusalem, which was basically the British administrative headquarters at the time. This bombing resulted in an immense loss of life. 91 people were killed. It drew immediate, harsh condemnation from the mainstream leadership of the Haganah, who felt it crossed a definitive moral line. The United Resistance Movement collapsed right then and there, and the factions bitterly parted ways again. Eventually, the relentless pressure, the clandestine immigration, and the underground warfare forced the British to just hand the entire problem over to the newly formed United Nations. In November 1947, the UN voted for the partition plan, dividing the land into a Jewish state and an Arab state. Almost immediately, war broke out. The defense forces were suddenly plunged into the ultimate test. They had to transform, practically overnight, from a scrappy underground militia into a conventional army capable of defending a newly declared state while actively under fire. Which brings us to the climax of the story. In May 1948, right in the middle of a full-scale war, the new Israeli government made a monumental decision. They officially dissolved all the various underground factions. They folded the elite strike forces, the rudimentary air and naval services, and the intelligence networks all into one single unified official state military. This was the birth of the Israel Defense Forces, the IDF. The era of the underground was officially permanently over. When David Ben-Gurion issued the founding order of the IDF, he made absolutely sure to recognize that this new army didn't just magically appear out of thin air on Independence Day. He stated, "Without the experience, planning, and the heroism of the Haganah, we would not have withstood the terrible test of blood, and we would not have reached the State of Israel." It was the direct result of nearly 30 years of intense preparation, secret training, immense sacrifice, and the slow, deliberate evolution of national responsibility. And that brings us to the end of our journey today, leaving us with a final thought to ponder long after this explainer is over. We've just seen how a few scattered guards on horseback transformed into a highly structured national army, all before a state even existed. It really begs the question, when a community decides to act with the utmost responsibility of a state from deep within the shadows, what other impossible dreams can be willed into reality? Thanks for joining me on this deep dive. See you next time.